It appears
might have been the TV. I don't hear anything anymore. So
okay, so let's. Might have been the. I had to literally unplug the microphone. So Eddie, are you seeing us live on PrimeGov?
We are live on PrimeGov and we're live on YouTube here.
Okay, so let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the special meeting for Budget Workshop number 3 for the Outfall Town Council on Thursday, May 19th, 2022. Before we get into our agenda, I will read the teleconference meeting script information since we have gone back to remote meeting for today. This regular meeting of the Town Council is held pursuant to Government Code Section 54953E related to teleconferencing of meetings. The Governor's proclamation of a state emergency is still in effect, and the Town Council has made or will make the necessary findings under the law to hold teleconference meetings in this manner. Proper notice was given for this meeting. All persons are permitted to join remotely and address the Town Council directly. The meeting will be delayed in the event of a town-caused disruption. This meeting will be held in all respects according to the requirements of Government Code Section 54953E. Town manager is present in his office. I am present in the council chambers, and Vice Mayor Dornbecker, council members Moeller, Knight, and Tagliabasci, along with staff, are participating remotely by video, audio, in conformance with Government Code Section 54953E. Members of the public may provide public comment as a Zoom webinar attendee and using the Zoom raise hand feature when I call upon that person at the appropriate time. Also via the town's public comment email, publiccomment@wybill.com, and also via the e-comment feature in PrimeGov, which can be found as a speech bubble with the HTML agenda. Before proceeding with the agenda, I'd like to remind everyone that any vote taken today will be taken by a roll call vote by the town clerk. Public hearing, we don't have any public hearings. Items that have representatives that are not staff will be entered into our meeting at the appropriate time. So first, I'd like to confirm that all members of the town council are present, and I'll ask our town clerk to conduct roll and confirm each member of the council can hear the proceedings and has a copy of the agenda. Eddie?
Yes, Mayor. Council member Tagliabasci?
Yes and yes.
Council member Knight?
Yes and yes.
Council member Moeller?
Yes and yes.
Vice Mayor Dornbecker?
Yes and yes.
Mayor Dunbar?
Yes. Thank you. Let the record reflect all council members are able to hear and have the agenda. So we will go ahead and have the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me and face the nearest flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to adopt today's agenda for the budget workshop number 3.
I will make that motion, Mayor, to adopt the agenda for budget workshop number 3.
Second.
I believe motion by Councilmember Moeller. I think Councilmember Tagliabasci was the seconder on that. So roll call, please, Eddie.
Yes. Council member Moeller?
Yes.
Council member Tagliabasci?
Yes.
Council member Knight?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dornbecker?
Yes.
Mayor Dunbar?
Yes. The budget or the agenda is adopted. Budget has not been adopted yet. We did receive one email public comment that is on items that are not specifically referenced in or on our agenda today. So we're going to go ahead and read that public comment into the record now. It does pertain to the budget in general, but we'll go ahead and get it on the record. Eddie, if you could please read that public comment and let me know if we had any others since this one.
Yes, Mayor. Good afternoon, Mayor, Town Council, and staff. As discussed at the May 5th Town Council Budget Workshop, the town sits at an interesting point. The record amount of money in the unassigned fund balance for the fiscal year 2021-2022, and an abundance of IT work and development. The town also has reserves and contingencies that help ensure the community's security. So how to spend some of that unassigned fund balance? The answer is clear to me and someone who watches all town council meetings, Yamville Arts, budget meetings, and Park and Rec, and in-house IT and Park and Rec. An in-house IT employee is imperative for the future of the town of Yamville. I will quickly remind you that we are 2+ years into this pandemic, which means over 2 years of Zoom meetings for the town. But yet again, the town council meeting this past Tuesday had sound issues that no one could resolve until 40 minutes into the meeting. Also, at last week's budget workshop, 2 departments, planning and town clerk specifically, are seeing cost increases because of IT work related to record retention and Laserfish. The Information Technology and Telecommunications General Fund Department 1011 is seeing an increased cost due to budgeting for a brand new website, phone system, and software. It is evident that an in-house experienced, knowledgeable IT person who is a town employee is crucial to support all these changes, updates, and the town staff. The town needs someone specifically in charge of all these tasks instead of 5 or 6 staff running around at the last minute trying to fix yet another of numerous issues we have seen repeat themselves during the previous 2 years. It is time to stay ahead of this and be prepared. An in-house experienced IT position will take care of all of this. It's as simple as the town council, all 5 members directing the town manager to make this happen. I highly suggest any council members questioning this idea to watch one of your recent meetings on the town's YouTube channel. You will agree. I can easily update the above statement for the immediate need of an experienced compliance officers as well. Thank you. Jeff Duran.
Thank you. And no other public comment on items not on today's agenda?
Correct, Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll consider those comments once we get through the rest of the budget presentation and consider any recommendations on that budget. So go ahead and move on to item 6A, and we'll get into those issues. I'm guessing that since Steve's unmuted, he wants to start again, and then we'll get to Celia. Steve.
Actually, you're correct. It will be, I'll do a little overview, then Celia will provide some updates, and then Public Works Director Ferns will talk in more detail about some of the Public Works focus, and then we'll do a wrap-up and discussion of feedback from prior and where we're going. So today we're going to talk about the 2 utility enterprise funds, the water wastewater funds, special revenue funds, capital projects funds, and our equipment repair and replacement funds. So just a quick overview on enterprise fund basics. As the council knows, we're in a current 5-year rate cycle that started January 22nd, and this is required by California state law. We have to do a 5-year review and a 5-year rate schedule. So the 2022 rate schedule is underway. The consultant has been selected and information is being provided so that we can work on developing. I'm also going to share with you that you're going to see some fluidity in the 5-year rate cycle discussion as we will be proposing projects, but also trying to pursue grants during this 5-year rate cycle to reduce ratepayer impact. So we're going to have to identify, and you will see some of those in the capital projects fund as either unfunded or funded, and we hope that there will be an offset from grants. The town cannot profit from water and wastewater rates. We are only allowed to recover costs and to provide revenue for capital improvements for the operation of the system. As a result, capital improvement funds are mostly funded by contributions from the operating fund. I also want to share one historical footnote. As the council knows, the council has adopted a policy that the general fund should not subsidize the utility enterprise funds. I happen to be doing some research for Don Schmidt. There's a research and a panel on the contributions of the Schmidt family towards Yountville. And a resolution was passed in July of 1977 where the policy at that point in time adopted by the council, including Don Schmidt, Capito, Thurman Gates was that the water and wastewater enterprise funds should be self-supporting. So this is not a new situation for Yountville, but it's one that comes up periodically, as the council knows, in conversations. So some enterprise fund basics. We'll move to the next page. Legislation, including Prop 218. Water, wastewater rates must be based on the cost of service. They must be proportional to all customers, and one group of customers cannot be subsidized by another group. And based on the 2015 San Juan Capistrano decision, tiered rates must be cost justified. And in a small system like ours, there's very little cost difference from moving water from one situation to another, so it's really limited the tiered rates. Tiered rates have been used principally as a water conservation mechanism. Proposition 26 governs water and wastewater fees, service turn-on fees, meter test, etc., and again specifies that they cannot exceed the actual cost of service. And then Government Code 66000 provides that water and wastewater capacity fees must be based on a reasonable nexus between the amount of the fee and the benefit received by the new connections. I share this with all of you just to let you and the public know utility rate revenues are anything but simple. They are very regulated, very structured, and very controlled by state structure. How are we doing? As we finish the current 5-year rate cycle, we know that we have water conservation efforts, and that translates into less use and potentially less revenue for the water fund. In Yountville, our rate structure includes a capacity and a system fee, so that covers our operating cost. We have a replacement fee component, and we have a usage charge, excuse me. So a few things looking backwards. The 2018 rate study could not have predicted the significant increased cost of water charged by the Veterans Home as compared to the prior 5-year cycle. That rate study also would not reasonably have anticipated the emergency closures of Rector Reservoir that resulted in the town having to spend almost the equivalent of $500,000 more than it normally would have to buy water from the city of Napa, and we still ended up having to pay the full cost of the operation of Rector Reservoir. It was assumed in 2018 that water costs would increase 7% each year. And I note this was above the CPI at that point in time. In actuality, rates charged by the Veterans Home have increased on average to closer to 18% each year. The cost of water in fiscal year 2021 was $1,787 per acre foot, and it's anticipated that in 21-22 it will approach $2,500 per acre feet. And also, since we're talking about water, and I'm going to call it dam math, because in our case, our joint powers agreement with the state requires that we pay approximately 50% of the operating cost for Rector Reservoir. I say this only because while we're going to be receiving 100 acre feet less of water, the operating costs incurred by the state are not going to significantly go down. This means we will actually be paying more on an acre foot basis and will not see a reduced water purchase cost. So that's just setting you all up for a little bit on how we try to operate the water wastewater funds. I will also share with you the good news is that the hard pill and efforts that we did 5 years ago have benefited, and the wastewater fund is in much better financial situation. And again, when we look at the water fund, really with the exception of the water purchase cost, we are on track and the operation is doing well. It's just that we buy water from the state and the cost of buying that water has significantly increased. So now I'm going to transition over to Celia, and she will remind us of some of the budget parameters and the variables as we go into the utility enterprise fund details.
Thank you, Town Manager Rogers, and hello, everyone. So this is a slide that will look familiar. We reviewed it in the prior budget workshop as well. And these are some expense variables that will be affecting the water and wastewater operating departments. And they are mostly to do with personnel. The total PERS costs are over $780,000 this year. And of course, the water and wastewater departments get an allocation of that based on the number of employees and the allocation of each employee. Within that 780,000 are the normal contributions that occur every payroll and the PERS UAAL that we will pay in July, and this is an annual cost. So this does include the code compliance position that was a result of the prior budget workshop and requested by council. So that position is being split between the planning, public works, water, and two wastewater departments, wastewater treatment and wastewater collections. So within these operating departments, you will see an increase in personnel due to that new position. A 7% COLA has been approved for employees for fiscal year 22-23. An assumption of 7% increase in health and dental. And then the reinstatement of the OPEB and PRSP trust contributions at 5% of projected salaries. That will be in each department that has been suspended for the prior 2 years and is coming back this year at a lower cost than it was previously. It was previously 14.5% for just the OPEB trust. Another return to normal cost will be for conference and travel and meetings and training as we invest in employee education and development. And then of course the allocated IT costs that include the new website upgrade, new phone system, and all the licensing agreements for our different softwares. I do see a question there. Would you like to stop at this point and address questions?
I was going to have you get through whatever your overview. If this is a good time to pause, that's fine. Councilmember Mueller? You're muted.
Are we done with the overview? This is a good time I want to address code compliance.
Is this the right time, Celia?
I would think so, yes.
Okay, so you said that the code compliance is going to be split between what two departments or what numbers?
It will be the planning department, public works department, water operating, wastewater collection operating, and wastewater treatment operating.
Okay, so 5 different department numbers. So I would just like to say, I think this code compliance is an extremely important component of all these departments. They certainly all need this support. And I know you said it's in the budget, but what's important to me is I would really like to recommend that this code compliance officer is an experienced person that has previous years of experience within this special function that they have, and that the salary, and I don't really see the numbers here, maybe you can fill that in later, would be commensurate with the appropriate experience and responsibility that this code compliance officer would have. I also think to get a senior person, we need to have very clear roles and responsibilities, so they would, in my opinion, both be creating and executing and being in charge of an entire compliance program. This is a brand new position for us. We've not had that, so I think it's certainly worthy of significant conversation here. It's going to be important for our whole organization. I think they also really need to have the experience where they can coordinate compliance-related training for all employees to make sure that all the properties within our jurisdiction are following the correct zoning laws and our municipal ordinances. I think, sometimes there maybe are certain departments that have a different level of code compliance about, hanging door hangers and stuff like that. But I think this job is very critical to us at this stage. We've got 1383 coming in, a lot of stuff we're doing, especially in water. Also, it's my opinion that I am fine with how you split it up, but I think that really kind of also brings up another thing I'd like to discuss, which is where this person would go. I have certainly been in many jobs and had experience about shared services like this, and I've always found it best because situations come up. Somebody has 40% time, somebody has 30. Who's in charge of this person? Who makes the decisions about where they need to go and what their priorities are? Sometimes, as we've all seen, somebody gets something in late and needs them right away to kind of help, and they didn't really plan ahead. So I really think something like this should go in a neutral department, much like Julie. She's already got HR, covers all the departments, IT covers all the departments. This one is covering 5 different functional areas as well. And that way, if anything comes up, one person, just a manager, not someone who makes decisions about what's more important than, something else, but, can allocate time appropriately without, having any issues between 5 different departments and one head count. So those are, and I think this needs to be a full-time FTE.
So you threw out about a dozen different ideas that we're supposed to try to digest. So I'm going to ask Celia and then maybe follow up with Steve. I'm assuming, Celia, that this is for code compliance specific to these utility operations. Is that correct? Because what I'm hearing Councilmember Mueller talk about is a universal code compliance need that if we're talking specifically about these utilities, then we could talk about it in this context. Otherwise, I think we need to hold off and talk code compliance on a universal basis after we get the presentation on all these funds. So Celia, can you kind of explain what it is that you're presenting here?
No, I'm going to jump
Or
in.
Steve, I guess.
There. Sorry. We actually have a slide later to talk more broadly about the code compliance. And what Celia was explaining to everybody is that we are putting the funding in at a management to analyst level. So it's a reasonably high up on the management level to look at it. We are starting discussions on the scope. You're going to see that. And certainly where it's housed, I mean, it could be housed in the manager's office, as are a number of things where they need to have a broader. But what I do want to say is we're taking to heart the council's request. The key element right now, it's being put in the budget. You will see that we're having preliminary discussions on trying to round up the topics, and then we're going to have to craft the approach to the position and try to identify what it is we're hoping to do consistent with the org culture and education approach in Yountville, and then move to recruit and fill the position. So I don't disagree, but I just want to know that the council had asked us to ensure that the position was filled, continue to work towards that. So we're letting you know, one, that we have made the budget adjustments. Also, based on the council's feedback, the utility enterprise funds will be funding a portion of that cost for the position. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the slide that shows you the level. And again, I used an analogy, if you will, with our own internal teams, that I'm kind of looking at part of this as being a paralegal. In other words, we're going to take and bundle a lot of the information that has to come from the source department. So the originating department, whether it's the water fund, a planning issue, or a building, has to be involved. This person will help to bundle it, package it, understand the nuances, and then work with the appropriate department head on the enforcement activity. So we have had some very quick moving discussions to move forward. So happy to answer more questions, but that's where we're at this point in time.
So Steve, are you saying that a single compliance officer could handle multiple specialties and certification levels of different departments? Brief answer, because it sounds to me like this is a premature conversation that needs to wait until later in the afternoon, but.
Well, I mean, however you want, when you want to have the conversation is up to you.
Well,
We are
my point is, if it has to do specifically with these funds we're talking about right now, that's one thing. If it's a universal position that goes across things we talked about at our last budget workshop and today, that should wait until we get through this part of the presentation. So if that's,
we wait until later if that is your preference.
well, if what I'm hearing you say is this would be a position that would go outside of the utility funds, including them, but go beyond that, and then we need to hear the presentation. We've been given a preliminary summary of the need in these departments, but we need to integrate that into the conversation about the other departments. So I think we need to hold off on additional, we've all made notes, I believe, about the issue of a compliance officer in-house, just like an IT in-house position. So those will come. We're stacking up all the things that we need to talk in more detail about, but I think we still need to get through the presentation of the utility funds. Is that satisfactory, Councilmember Mueller?
I think so. So what you're saying, at least for the compliance officer, that we're going to have this discussion, and it will include what we're talking about today, but it'll be a broader discussion, and it'll occur today.
Yes, it'll include the previous budget discussion when the compliance officer came up,
Right.
just like the IT officer came up.
Because I don't think we were clear last time, so I think it's a very important discussion to have.
We will have it as we get back into the kind of overall budget review and some of the items. We listed some other potential add-ons and changes to the budget. This will be part of that conversation. Yes, Councilmember Tagliabashi.
Sorry, Mayor, I'm supportive of what Councilmember Moore was attempting to do, and I'm happy to wait until the appropriate time. So thank you for your patience, and I'll be ready when that time comes.
Yeah, we will definitely be talking about that once we get through the presentation of the new material, and then we're going to go through the overall overview. Okay, I think Celia, shall we go?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And as Town Manager Rogers mentioned, there is this slide specific to code enforcement compliance or code compliance officer, so that will be coming up soon. Okay. So as we're starting with the water funds, this is a snapshot of all water funds combined and shows the revenues and expenditures. And as you can see, there's a history here of the revenues not being able to quite keep pace with the expenditures for operating and capital needs. And these funds have been operating in a deficit for a few years. And this is a graphical representation of those numbers. On the bottom there, that orange line is revenues, which looks fairly flat. And then the expenditures is the red line, which is obviously much higher, unfortunately, mostly due to water costs. And another small factor, I know the town manager mentioned that the drought does have a slightly negative effect on water revenues. Also, penalties and late fees, though they are not a revenue source that the town counts on, they do have a small impact, and those have been suspended during the COVID-19 pandemic for the state. So that we were not collecting any of those fees through 2020 and from 2020 through 2022. So relatively flat in water revenues, which is not keeping pace with those ever increasing costs. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Director Ferns for some more detail about the water operating and capital expenditures.
Thank you, Director King. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. As my predecessor used to say every morning, let's get after it. So let's get after it and get through these funds. The slide before you is the water utility budget. It represents all the funds. There's as you've heard a common theme throughout all of our budget meetings, there's a slight increase in personnel. Supplies and services are going up across the board. Mostly it's things are more expensive now and fuel costs are more expensive now. Capital outlay for water is a little less because we don't have a size and scale of project of Washington Park. Water purchases are fairly constant, and you'll hear in a slide or two that we've been successful in not purchasing Napa water in the volumes that we have had to in the past. So overall, there's a 13% increase in the water utility budget. Next slide, please. So water operations and distribution, total budget is just over $700,000. The budget highlight that I want to speak about and bring to everybody's attention is the Municipal Well #1. So in the current fiscal year, we were successful in transitioning the town's emergency well to an operational well. And when I say that, I mean we were able to convert the permit that we had for the well being an emergency well to an operational well, and then we were able to go through the steps to make it produce water. So now throughout the year, we have worked the well into our water supply, but doing so brings in new costs that we weren't experiencing before because we weren't using the well, specifically chemicals that we feed at the well site, and then the utility costs associated with pumping the well. So the well right now in its current configuration, we can produce about 10 acre feet a month. We've been taking readings of the groundwater level and it's been constant the entire time. So we haven't seen any effects on the local groundwater. And with the second year of CalVet telling us that we can only have 400 acre feet, we will incorporate the well into our water supply. Next slide, please. This one is water purchases and conservation. The total budget is 1.1 million, similar to what Town Manager Rogers was talking about earlier. The highlight for this year is it's the second year that we're only getting 400 acre feet. However, the cost to produce that volume of water doesn't vary dramatically on the CalVet side of things. So our costs are going to be consistent going forward. The well will help on the Napa water side of things, meaning that we don't need to turn on the well can supplement in those occasions where we might have used Napa water. So we've minimized our Napa water use. Next slide, please. And this is that same graph that Town Manager Rogers was referring to, where the cost in the last 5 years for Rector water went up dramatically, and it's kind of leveling off, but it's still consistently high. These numbers will be built into the rate study going forward. Next slide, please. So water utility capital improvement fund, this total budget is $275,000. This is the project category for water utility capital projects. The big ticket item that you see or will see is also associated with the well. So as described previously, when we got the well up and running, it takes manpower to drive down there and physically pull the levers and push the buttons and turn the knobs to get everything up and running. And then the same thing at the end of the day to turn it off. So we're proposing $140,000 budget for integrating the well, the operational well, into our existing SCADA monitoring system. And just a reminder, SCADA means supervisory control and data acquisition. It's an archaic term for remote control. So this project will bring the well into our systems and allow the operators to monitor it and manage it remotely as needed. Next slide, please. The Water Drought Reserve Fund. This fiscal year end fund balance is about 1.9 million. And just recall that this was the fund that we borrowed the money for to do the Washington Park Water Project. So that 1.9 million includes the loan receivable amount of around 900,000. The good news is we've been able to manage our resources, and the response from the community, which we think has been great. So we have not needed to draw upon the drought reserve fund. So it can remain out there as the drought persists in case we do need to draw upon it. And then next slide, please. The water connection impact fee fund. So impact fees are those fees applied to private projects that add new or additional demands on the system. In this case, it's the water system. So being built out in Yountville, we don't see these very often and we don't budget for them. But this particular year, we did have 2 projects come through that had new additions to the system. So those 2 projects combined for around $11,000 in impact fees. And with that, next slide, please. That's the end of water.
Yeah, so before you proceed, Councilmember Tagliabashi has his hand raised.
Thanks much, Director Fern and Director King. Appreciate your information. It's always helpful to help understand this complex utilities rates and what goes into them. So my question relates to utility purchase and conservation. And I'm wondering, I know when I was the Public Works Director, we had many conversations about the amount of personnel that the town was paying for to help Rector manage the water, making the water up at Rector. And we had limited success in kind of figuring that out. And that goes directly to what we pay for the water, the cost of water. And I'm wondering if you all have had any more success, or if you have a plan to help maybe actually figure out what the costs are and the personnel that are actually making water up there at Rector.
And before, John, before you go to that, can we just back up the slide to that purchases and conservation slide, just so we see the number in front of us?
This
There we go.
one or this one?
That's it. No, well, I mean,
The one
yeah,
up in the air.
the other one is the one I was using to
There we go.
base the question on. Yeah.
That's great. Okay. John?
Thank you.
I'm going to let Celia answer because I think she's a little more involved with that at this point, but this is my first year of coming involved. So Director King, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you. So last year we did bring up these costs, and we did ask the representative from the Veterans Home if they could work with Calvet to get maybe an allocation of personnel costs. And I think what we heard is that the software that they use at this point cannot allocate in that manner. I think it's definitely something we're going to bring up again this year when we start the true up conversations, because even if it's not a software issue, perhaps maybe it could be a bit of a manual process to try and get a true picture of what salaries really are applicable to only the water production. So we'll revisit it again. I think they did also say that for the most part, all of their staff were working on water-related projects, water production-related projects. But I think it's just going to take more conversation, and possibly Town Manager Rogers might have more input on this. It's a little difficult to get results from Calvet, especially when we're asking for more detail on things. So we will definitely keep trying to get that level of detail so that we can really make sure we're only paying what is appropriate to be paying.
Yes, I think you're just reinforcing what Director King is saying. We do look at that. We do question, and the council and especially former Director Tagliabashi would know, we did object a few years back, and we refused to pay certain expenses because they didn't have justification. So we're not uncomfortable in doing that. We were of the opinion that we might see some improved information, but that is definitely on, it's part of our true-up evaluation. We are very detailed with what we give them, and we even show them, and we continue to ask for more clarity in their budget.
Yeah, it sounds like we're going to take a more forceful position on that again. That's what it sounds like we need to do.
Well, I don't want to say, we've been continuing that. It's on ours and we're trying to make sure, because I don't want to say that we haven't been doing something with regards to
No,
that.
and I'm not inferring that. It just clearly they're not responding to the nice requests. So,
and I do want to be clear also that we knew that they needed to increase staffing, and that part of they hadn't filled certain positions and they were understaffed. So part of there's an expectation that we were going to pay a bit more. The question I think that the Councilmember Tagliabashi has is that there may be some costs that we're seeing from certain positions that we're of the opinion are doing things in addition to water. They may touch water, but the argument that they're 100% water is questionable to us. So yes, we're monitoring and trying our best to track that.
Thank you much. Yeah, and we know, I mean, from my time there, that there were folks that were 100% water that were doing sewer and other related tasks up on property. And I'm wondering if it's something as simple as a FOIA request. I mean, we all use budget control. The town uses budget control, position control to help define what each person does for what part of their yearly task. And every organization I've been in on the public side has had a similar document. So I'm wondering if that document exists, could we use something as simple as FOIA to request that document and then maybe get to a back way if they're not? It didn't seem to me that they were very willing to share that information on any level. So just interested in what comes of that, and definitely will help us understand our rates a little better and what we're getting charged. So thank you.
yes, we'll definitely be following that up. And if we need to get our town attorney involved in crafting that request, we will certainly be doing that. Councilmember Knight?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Director King and Director Ferns, for your report. I would just come back to this because I had some similar notes, and I'm not going to want to over, what we need to talk about this issue. I'm looking at the Enterprise Fund 61 Department 4507 on our website. There's a clear chart that shows, our rate increases. I mean, I was on the council back, I think when I left in 2005, we had water per acre foot rate of around 500. We crossed 1,000 in 2016, 2,000 in 2018. And I guess my question is, how does the CalVet justify the acre per foot increases? I mean, is it staffing? Is it upgrades? I mean, how do they tell us on a year-to-year basis when we go from 500 acre foot in 2005 to potentially 2,500 this next year? I mean, how do they get there? One of the issues I know with our water and sewer is that we cannot charge different rates. We cannot tier rates to like our residents and then out of town residents. So do we know if we're getting charged a rate more than they're charging themselves for the property at the veterans home?
So I'll chime in, and then Steve, if you'd like to follow up. It's not necessarily a rate per acre foot that we're paying. It is per the agreement, it's a percentage of their operating costs. So the way that we come up with the cost per acre foot is we get those costs that the town is liable for, and we divide that basically by the acre foot that we received. So that's how we're getting the cost per acre foot. It's not something that that CalVet is stipulating this is the cost per acre foot. They just say, these were our costs, here's your percentage that you're liable for per the agreement. And then we compare it to how much water we received, and that's how we derive that cost per acre foot.
And I will expand a little. That's exactly how it is. But Councilmember Knight, and for the whole council, labor expenses, personnel expenses, chemical supplies, equipment, all the things related to it, regulatory compliance. And what we're seeing, and it's not news to some of you, unfortunately, there's been a lot of deferred or lack of maintenance and understaffing at Rector. So when you look at the last 3 or 4 years, you're seeing, one, they've had to go in, we've had some catastrophic failures. So fixing a catastrophic failure is generally much more expensive than a planned maintenance and replacement. So we end up paying for that price. We also end up paying in those cases to purchase water from the city of Napa because we still have to provide water. We have those agreements, and then they now have increased their staffing level. So, I mean, short answer, Councilmember Knight, but those are the costs. Those are all identified in the agreement. And this agreement's been in place for a number of years and continued, but that's why I tell everybody the fact that we're going to be getting 100 acre-feet less from the supply does not mean that the water cost is going down, because proportionately we pay about 50% of the operating costs. So there are a handful of other customers, and we do evaluate that, and that is part of the true-up.
And I understand that, and I appreciate that, Town Manager. And, you know, I guess with the little information we have, it may be very possible that they've been undercharging us for years. But I think we have a unique relationship. I don't think there's a lot of other cities that obviously have this type of relationship. And I just think it would be, if we're at a point of we're negotiating a new contract with them soon, that we do everything we can to get them to provide current and costs, and to give us an idea, you know, so we can plan in the future if they anticipate those costs to be up, or find a way that maybe we participate more in that process with them. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add 2 other things. One is everything has gone up in price from 2005 to 2022. I think I drove by a local gas station recently to that point. But the other thing is that I remember when we did work with Calvet on their personnel allocation and their kind of under support for Rector operations, there was an acknowledgement that for many, many years, if not decades, they weren't really monitoring that water capacity or quality really at all, almost at all. And so they were, I think, significantly under managing, and now they have caught up to some of that. To your point, Councilmember Knight, that yes, I think not only did they add personnel, but they added actual operations that were needed all along that maybe we should have been charged for, because they should have had it in place many, many years ago, and they finally were catching up. I think I remember that part of the conversation when we were acknowledging, go ahead and hire more people so you can actually operate the water system appropriately, and we're prepared to take on the appropriate burden, but we still need to confirm that the burden's appropriate.
Thank you.
Councilmember Dornbecker.
Thank you, Mayor Dunbar. So over the years, I remember we've had this conversation on and off, and maybe every time we've had the budget. But I'm not sure if do we have a representative up there who can provide oversight so that what they say, we can actually, you know, count on it being the case? Because I know that we wanted that in the past, and have we been able to achieve having a full-time or even someone part-time to sort of, I know when something has gone wrong up there, we've had some representation up there, but do we not on a normal basis have any representation up there?
No, and I also have to say, I think we do have ability to get information, the details, and I think to Councilmember Knight, we have 2 unique operations. The town is the operating and manager for the wastewater treatment plant operations, and the Rector Reservoir is responsible. So we do not have jurisdictional authority with regards to the Rector Reservoir wastewater. Under the agreement, they are supposed to provide us the documentation to support it. Likewise, we provide the documentation and details to support what our expenses were for the wastewater treatment plant operation. But no, we do not have a staff person up on the hill managing that reaction or at the reservoir.
Thank you. I was afraid of that.
And Vice Mayor, I got your subtle hint. And Councilmember Knight, if you could just lower your hand unless you had something additional. Okay, thank you. Celia, we're going back to you.
Yes, let me start the screen share. And is everyone seeing the water purchases and conservation slide?
Yes.
Okay. Get us back to where we were. Moving into the Wastewater Utility Enterprise Fund. So again, we have a snapshot here of all funds rolled up, showing the revenue and expenditures. The wastewater side has fared a bit better than the water utility side. There's a history of revenue being able to cover needed expenditures for operating and capital, with the exception of fiscal year 22-23. As you see, there's a little bit of use of fund balance, and that is mainly due to the cost of the joint treatment plant modernization project, and you'll hear more about that in future slides. Again, a graphical representation, that top red line being the revenue, staying above that blue line of expenditures until this proposed budget.
Okay. So wastewater utility budget, all funds shown on the screen. In general, the theme is the same. Personnel and services supplies have gone up for all of the reasons that we've just talked about. Capital outlay is up because we have a few projects coming through, but in general, the total increase is 20%. Next slide, please. So this one, Celia, or Director King, sorry, I wasn't prepared for this one.
Okay, I'll go ahead and take it. So this is just showing the transfers between the operating funds and the capital funds. Operating Fund 62 will give $200,000 to Capital Fund 63 for wastewater treatment capital projects. And operating will give $600,000 to wastewater collection capital recovery projects, Fund 64. And then we have our annual debt payments. Fund 63 pays $164,661 to the State Water Resources Loan. And Fund 64 pays its share of the 2020 direct placement bonds for the Madison and Yount Street replacement project. In the amount of $29,000. And what did drop off this year was the approximately $12,000 payment for the director fund. Was that the energy efficiency loan? I think that's on the next slide, so I'll go forward.
And also, just from a long-range planning note, we will see the lease revenue bond payment drop in 2027. So that will, again, add a little more fiscal capacity to the wastewater fund.
So jumping into wastewater utility collections, I want to clarify as these next few slides come through and just remind people, we were having this conversation amongst staff in the office this morning, so it reminded me I should bring it up here. The wastewater enterprise consists of two real distinct systems, for lack of a better word. So we have the collection system, which is the pipe network in the streets that drain down to the pump station, and then the pumping system that pumps it via a force main up to the treatment plant. So That gravity system, that pump system, and that force main are funded and operated out of the collection system. And then once it gets to the plant, it flips over to the treatment side of things. So this particular slide and budget is specific to the collection system operations. Total budget for the coming year is $457,000. It has that same $10,000 increase for rising utility costs and fuel costs. And then we do have a $1,500 subsidy from the general fund for the low income subsidy program that is part of our standard programs. Next slide, please. So on the flip side, I just described the distinction between the two systems. So this one's the water treatment side of things, and this is the plant and the staff that work at the plant. So the pending budget for this one is $1.4 million, and this is where you will see the Napa sanitation contract that you all approved this week. Thank you for that. $70,000 budgeted in the contract services category for the Napa sanitation contract services that are going into effect starting soon. I'm meeting with them tomorrow to work out our game plan. And then there's also $12,000 in savings due to paying off the energy efficiency loan that was discussed in the previous slide. Next slide, please. So this is the wastewater treatment capital fund. So this is our project fund. The total budget is $1.7 million. There's an asterisk there. The information on the slide has been adjusted slightly from the information that was published with the staff report, and that goes back to the concept of those two separate systems that we were talking about. There were two projects that were there was two collection projects that were inadvertently put in the treatment bucket of money. So shifting those two projects into the correct collections bucket of money adjusted these numbers slightly. The big ticket item here is the $803,000 budgeted for the joint treatment plant modernization project. That is a bigger number than you've seen in the past because of the cost of services and the cost of materials have gone up. That project has evolved in its inception a few years ago. It was conceived as a design build project, but that type of project doesn't lend itself to the size and scale of the project that we have. And so it's evolved slightly in the design side of things to make sure we have enough plans to go out to bid. The good news is this was pending PG&E work that is happening now. So you've heard us say many times that to get into PG&E's design schedule, it's 12 months to 18 months. So we started this process last year with PG&E, and they're out there now doing the necessary work in advance of the construction project, which we hope to get out to bid this year. And the good news is at the end of this fiscal year, the fund will be able to meet the minimum reserve established in our prior rate study. Next slide, please.
Director Burns, if I could just jump in real quick on this slide and just point out that veterans home 50% share of project cost at $617,000 with the change of some of the projects from one fund to another, this is actually going to go up. So in the final proposed document, I think you'll see that this is closer to $700,000 as they pay 50% of the project cost. So I just wanted to point out that number will be finalized in the final proposed budget.
Thank you, Director King. And building on that idea and harping on my two system idea, it's just a reminder that the town's collection system doesn't have the cost share arrangement that the treatment system does. So the 50% cost share is on the treatment side of things, and the collection system doesn't have that same cost share. On the flip side of the previous slide, the asterisk is here to receive the money for those two projects that we were talking about. The revised numbers, $55,000. The projects that are the specific projects are a safety and lifting equipment for the wet well. So we've determined that we need a safety netting and a different lid system that has a lift assist associated with it to improve the safety of operating the wet well. And then the other project is a pump station assessment and evaluation to determine how to best manage the pump system going forward. As we do the third project, which is inflow and infiltration, the flows are changing that come into the plant. So we want to maximize the opportunities with the existing pump systems that we have there. Next slide, please. Sewer connection impact fee. As with water, impact fees are charged to projects that introduce a new or additional demand on the system. Again, Yountville's built out, so we don't have a lot of this or very often, and we don't budget for it. But in this past year, we did those same two projects that brought in water impact fees, brought in just over $17,000 in sewer impact fees. Next slide, please. So the utility programs that you see before you now are annual programs that we regenerate every budget cycle. As you can imagine, moving all the water and wastewater around that we do, it requires lots of moving parts. Those moving parts rely on pumps, motors, machines, valves, and those things, when they're operated 24/7, need maintenance and or repair. So the line items that you see before you are for sewer main replacement and repair in the event we have some of the need for that. Plant equipment replacement program is specific to equipment at the plant up by the golf course. Pump station equipment replacement program is specific to the pump station down by the river. And then the water meter replacement program is an ongoing program. And this particular year, we're looking at servicing and calibrating several of the large water meters that we own and operate. And with that, it's the end of wastewater, and we're open for questions.
Great. I want to acknowledge on that last slide, the proactivity that we do prior to failures of those systems and equipment, that we're able to make sure that we maintain the operation ability of those. And that's I don't want to call it a luxury, because we have some very strong fiscal discipline to be able to afford to do that prior to failures when it becomes a crisis and an emergency. So I don't want those to be underappreciated. Questions first, Councilmember Knight, followed by Councilmember Tagliabashi.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Thank you again, Director King and Ferns. I apologize. As I was going through preparing for today, I went through each fund and made notes. So maybe as we move through, if we could stop after the end of each fund to ask questions, because I'd like to go back to just the summary in Fund 62. I noted that under revenues for the from the veterans home, that they had like a 50% increase and we received, or there's a 50% increase from 2019, 2020 to propose, from like 750 to 1.1. Why is that? I assume it's not part of their capital investment, but why is the revenue increase? Is that water intrusion effect into the, or I mean, a storm drain intrusion into the system, raising their costs of processing?
I think the short answer, Councilmember Knight, is there's a flow meter, so a portion of their cost is based on the flow into the plant. And then on several of those years, they do pay, one of the disciplines we have is we're much, as opposed to say 10 years ago, we've learned, we bill them much more proactively for their capital share. So, we may have just a couple $100,000 in capital project expense that year, and then they will bill that. So you will have both what we would consider normal operating revenue and their share of capital.
So that's part of this aggregate wastewater fund summary. That 1.1 proposed or estimated for this is a combination of their investment as well as processing fees. Is that what you're saying, Town
Yes.
Manager?
Correct.
Yeah, Director King, were you going to add something to that before we have additional questions from Councilmember Knight?
I don't think so, Mayor. Thank you. My internet is a bit unstable, so I'm only getting bits and pieces, but I think that the town manager covered it.
Okay, great. Councilmember Knight, and just for clarity, we're going to go through each category in its entirety because there are some cases like in this specific section where one slide depends on another slide, and the collections versus the treatment is a good example of that. So that's why I asked you to hold your questions to the end, is so we can go through however many questions you have, we can cover them now.
Thank you. So let's see. So one point here, in the staff reports, I'm sorry, one of the funds under Fund 63, Department 4518, the utility treatment capital recovery, as you have talked about in terms of 50% of planned capital costs that the Veterans Home does pay. That you said that this is consistent with the agreement between the town and the Veterans Home. Is that agreement have a review or update date in the future? Are we discussing with them that agreement now, or?
I believe it expires in June of 2024, so probably end of fiscal year or beginning of fiscal year 23-24, probably there will be negotiations to amend or extend the contract. Correct, Town Manager?
Correct.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Any additional questions, Councilmember Knight?
No, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Tagliabashi.
Thank you very much, Director Ferns and Director King. Again, appreciate the information and making a very complex subject easy to digest for those of us who aren't living in your world. So first comment I have is thank you, Director King and Director Ferns for reminding us that the Vets Home is picking up 50% of the costs at the treatment plant, or pretty close to that based on their influence into the plant. And I think to answer Councilmember Knight's question, most of that increase, if not all of it, from the previous year to this year is probably based on the modernization of the treatment plant offices. It's pretty close to $400,000, which I guess is going to be pretty close to the cost of that project was $800,000. So that kind of explains that number. And then I had a question on SCADA. This is more for Director Fern. So between the water and wastewater, it looks like 190,000 on SCADA. Is that close to accurate, Director Ferns?
Yes.
So with that, do you think that this is going to be a continuing cost? I know when I was working on budgets, there was a point in time where we thought we would have all the SCADA captured, but do you think you're getting to that point now, or is this the more SCADA that we get, and the more equipment that we add, it needs that SCADA supplement, and so we will continue this into the foreseeable future?
It's a combination of both. The water SCADA is bringing a whole system online, and the system that we're bringing online is modern and is designed to interact with systems going forward. The ongoing costs aren't going to be as dramatic, but the challenge is the age of the older systems. And so as systems, we start experiencing problems with variable speed pump controls and things like that, we're discovering that it's old technology and it's at the end of its life. So we're having to budget for newer, more efficient and better SCADA systems. So it's going to be an ongoing budget item, but it won't have the big ticket item like the pump or the SCADA system for the well does.
Thank you very much. So I appreciate that, and I think we all understand what happens when our technology ages out, and I think I will be looking to discuss the IT portion of this when that's appropriate at the end of this presentation. And then I noticed that the outfall pipe, we have 40,000 budgeted for this year. It looks like you're going to use that 40,000 for inspection and evaluation. And can you discuss if that was completed, performed, or yet to be performed, and what, if any, revelations came from that?
It has yet to be performed, so we don't have it. I don't have any revelations or information yet.
So that'll just be rolling over into next year.
Yes.
And then the wastewater treatment plant maintenance and repair, that seems to be a relatively new item. I don't remember seeing that in years past. Can you discuss that a little bit? We dredged that pond, I think, 2 years ago. And so I'm a bit surprised to see a $300,000 number coming up. Stuff happens, and sometimes it's unforeseen. And I was wondering if you could give us a bit more detail on that project.
That specific one is not in this year, but it's next year. But it is specific to the age and condition of both the recycled water pond, but more importantly, the effluent pond or the influent pond. And we're recognizing that those ponds were not designed, or they were designed in 1977, but obviously that was a long time ago. And we're observing things that are causing us to think we're going to need a bigger maintenance/repair project specific to the pond. And so
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing about the study that comes before that and some of the details. And I'm sure we'll hear about it during the rate study. So thank you very much.
Councilmember Knight, additional questions?
Thank you. I meant to put my hand down, but I did notice that as Councilmember Tagliabachi noted, that outfall pipe to the Nap River. Looking at our capital CIP budget, we work on that for multiple years out in the next 5 years. So that's kind of interesting. Are you designing locations along that outfall pipe to be able to go in and inspect or do repairs from the treatment plant all the way to Silverado Trail? Is that the purpose of these multi-year budget items?
It's really specific to the outfall as it releases to the Napa River. And the challenge with evaluating that pipe is, number one, new outfalls are hard to come by at Department of Fish and Game. And so the work that we do, we try to limit it to be inside the creek bank from the actual outfall itself. And the challenge with that particular pipe for evaluation is it's inside a larger diameter pipe that's a casing and it shares that space with the force main that takes the sewage from the pump station up to the plant. So there's a large diameter casing that has a force main going uphill and a gravity line going downhill. It's that gravity line going downhill inside that casing that is our outfall to the river. And there's no easy access or way to get to that without having to, open that casing and then minimize impacts to the force main while we're trying to evaluate the outfall.
So are you doing that at multiple locations along the line, or at least beyond that? Is it just one location? You make that cut and
yeah, we're trying. We don't know yet, but there will be. I think that there will be multiple locations. One close to the river, but not within the riparian bank system. And then, as everyone's aware, those pipes cross underneath the highway. So the other two potential locations would be either side of Highway 29.
Okay, good. That's fascinating. Thank you.
Seeing no other hands, and Celia, I think, are we ready for special revenue funds?
Yes. Okay.
All right, moving away from utility enterprise funds, we are getting into special revenue funds. These are funds that we use to fund specific projects in town not related to the enterprises. So the first one that we're viewing today is the state gas tax fund. Total expenditures are in proximity of the estimated revenue, which is right around $85,000 to $88,000. And this is the first special revenue fund of 3 that we use to maintain our streets at such a high level. And by saying that, I mean this dollar amount wouldn't go very far if you were going to try to pave a street with it. But what we can do is use this money to prepare the designs, the plans, specs, and estimates to go out to bid for the paving projects and fund those paving projects with a fund we're going to talk about in a minute. And it maximizes the money available to do the actual paving. We also use gas tax money on the back end for the inspection services while the projects are being paved. And as everyone will recall from the Washington Park paving project, having a competent inspector is invaluable when you're inspecting paving projects. Next slide, please. So this is the second of the funds that we used for our streets. And this one is where the bulk of the project money comes from, for lack of a better word. It's Measure T. Measure T is a half-cent sales tax specific to transportation projects up and down the valley. Our share is in the range of $525,000 a year. That is actually a good size for us to accomplish a good dollar amount for us to accomplish good sized projects annually. You'll recall we just finished doing Washington Street South with our Measure T money. So this coming year, we're looking at 2 or 3 streets that have the lowest PCI. We're going to grind and overlay those, and then we're going to do repair work in other streets in town with the idea that next year we'll come in and do a microsurface, which is a treatment that you put on top of streets that are in fairly good shape to extend their life. And in the next 2 years, we're not maxing out our use of that $525,000, so we can carry forward a balance and then do Washington Street North in year 3. So we're planning slightly smaller dollar amounts in these 2 years so we can get to a bigger dollar amount and finish the other half of Washington Street. Next slide, please. So this is the third of the 3 funds that we use for street repairs. This is SB1. SB1 gets us around $66,000 a year. And what my predecessors learned, and I think it's a great idea, is if you can use a separate fund to do the concrete work, curb, gutter, and sidewalk in advance of the paving projects, it's easier to manage those size and scale projects with a concrete contractor, and then you can independently hire a paving contractor to do the asphalt work, and you're not suffering the effect of one contractor doing both projects and then a concrete subcontractor causing time delays and added expense. So breaking the streets projects down by these 3 funds is a really clean way to maximize all 3 funds and keep our streets to that high level that we're so proud of. Next slide, please. Special Revenue Fund 27 is the Measure T equivalent fund. When Measure T was adopted, there's a requirement that 6.67% of money set aside of the money be set aside for Class 1 bicycle improvements. It's a county-wide requirement, but the agencies in the county haven't combined effort to do that, to address that as a whole. So each agency is keeping track of our own obligations, and we have exceeded our obligation. For example, the Hopper Creek Pedestrian Bridge project in the range of $300,000 covers us for quite some time because our 6% of our $525,000 is only around $35,000 a year. Next slide, please. Measure A, as most people remember, was a half-cent sales tax measure that existed prior to Measure T. It was for flood projects up and down the valley. It's now a maintenance fund. We have a budget of $20,000. It's for us to inspect and repair the flood project on the south, the flood wall on the south end of town as needed. Next slide, please. So Special Revenue Fund 76, this was a fund to account for a FEMA grant that was awarded to the town prior to the flood project. And then the flood project was constructed in 2004-05, and we maintain it. So that debt service has been paid, and this fund has been closed with any balance being transferred to Fund 75, staying in the flood project category. Next slide, please. So that was it for special revenue funds.
And I see Councilmember Takebashi has his hand raised.
Thank you much, Mayor Dunbar. Director Ferns, I appreciate the information. I just wanted to point out the obvious that for those of us who travel around Napa County at any time in their day or week or life, we have an enviable pavement condition index. I think it's slipped to 77 this month based on the report I got, but that's what happens with the pavement condition index, the PCI. If you don't do work, it kind of slips away, and you have to make a conscious decision to keep those to keep the pavement in good condition, and we do that on the council has done that on a regular basis for a number of years and continues to do that. These funds that GATFAX, Measure T, and our own general fund have supplemented to a great degree, and I appreciate staff continuing to look after the streets in town and have a long-term plan to take care of some of the more expensive costs, including Washington Street, because it just doesn't get cheaper, and there are many ways to fund it, but I appreciate that we have a plan to do that with money that's going to become available to us through the tax. So thank you very much.
And I don't see any other hands raised, so we can continue.
Okay, I'll start talking while the computer catches up. Capital Improvements Funds 50. So this is our general fund, capital improvement. This is a snapshot of the projects that are planned in the coming year. They're broken down by the various categories. I want to point out that the civic facilities category shows 0 because of the way we've chosen to fund facilities maintenance going forward. So you'll hear more about civic facilities in a later slide. The community projects, in this case, it's Forester Park and 3 Weirs, ADA improvements. And I have a slide that will show a picture of that momentarily. Drainage and flood control is our annual hydro flush of the systems that drain to Beard Ditch. Parks and Recreation is money placed in there for the proposed design of the path looping around behind the tennis courts of Vineyard Park, the tennis and pickleball courts of Vineyard Park. And it's important to note that we're putting this money in there for the design part of it, but we are actively seeking and applying for grants to fund the construction of it. So while the design will help increase our grant opportunity chances. Streets and Transportation, that's the surveys and monuments and traffic calming budget. Next slide, please. So the total budget for this coming year for Capital Projects Fund 50 is $468,000. Forester Park, 3 Weirs Park ADA is a grant-funded project with $160,000 revenue. The slide highlights the fact that Measure T, SB1, and gas tax used to come out of Fund 50, but now, based on those special revenue funds we talked about previously, this fund doesn't have to bear the burden of the streets, And then the general fund contribution for this fiscal year is $750,000. Next slide, please. So Washington Parks and Path ADA Accessibility Project, we are working on the design of this now. We have a consultant that's helping us. And this project or these projects have come to the town before. I want to point out that the distinction is this project is funded by TDA funds, but it's specific for ADA access to Forester Park and Three Weirs Park. This project is separate from the project to do ADA improvements to Forester Lane to get from Vista to the path, the Forester Park path. So originally the town considered those projects together. We were able to acquire this fund or this grant fund to do this portion of it. And then that traffic calming slide really wants to be heard. So the other half of the budget, you can skip it, Celia, or skip ahead, please. So the traffic calming budget is an annual budget, and this is an example of one that we've accomplished this year. We were able to, based on citizen input, we were able to rework this corner. We reworked the ADA ramp, the end of sidewalk barricade, and the striping to improve pedestrian and bike transition from Yount Street to Yountville Crossroad. Next slide, please. So the annual programs, the town adopted an ADA transition plan several years ago. I think this is year 7 of 12. This is an annual budget that we put in for ADA compliance projects. It could be ramps, it could be improvements to the streets or sidewalks or public facilities. We have GIS mapping improvements. That is an ongoing program that funds the mapping that we're able to do for all of the town services. The townwide drainage erosion program is a program to maintain our storm drains if it ever rains again. And then surveys, monuments, and traffic calming are annual streets budgets that we draw upon as needed to make traffic calming improvements throughout town, as well as do survey work. Next slide, please. So that was the end of Fund 50.
So I'm going to ask a question, then I see a couple hands raised. Just very quickly, related to ADA compliance and some of those improvements, it seems that the colorization of ADA, either dome pads and even how you stripe some parking areas has changed. Is that correct?
Yes, the ADA laws are always changing, and as we do certain levels of project, it triggers the need to replace or modernize ADA facilities. Presently, the truncated domes, which are those bumpy things at the ramps, they used to be, they had to be yellow, and then they've changed it so it has to be a contrasting color that you can choose to a certain level of contrast.
So I don't know if that's something to consider, or if then we have a patchwork of different colors all over town and it's not consistent. So that's, I assume that's something that's being factored in by consultants as we're designing these other areas that are going to be added to that ADA system.
Yes, that's correct. We are constantly, we're trying to get a consistent color on Washington Street for sure. And then as we do projects throughout the neighborhoods, we're being consistent, and it's that gray color that you see. We're getting away from the bright yellow ones. You will see bright yellow ones on occasion. They were done fairly recently and then not in need of repair or replacement yet, but we are aware of the need to make all of those consistent.
And just quickly back to the Three-Weirs Park improvement, it looked like quite a bit of concrete in that design. Could you just maybe very quickly, I don't need to get into too much of the detail as you're working on the design, but and if we go back to that slide, potentially the Washington Park and Three-Weirs slide, to try to fully explain how that small park is going to transition And is there any reason to have any of the natural grass remaining if a significant part of that is going to be taken out? And just make it more drought tolerant landscaping, for example.
Yes, in the upper right photo is a rendering of what the ADA compliance could be for Three Weirs Park. The reason that you see it that way is the vertical elevation difference between the existing sidewalk and the path and the bridge that crosses Hopper Creek are such that it's challenging to do it with the grades that the slopes that the ADA requires. So we worked with the designer to minimize the footprint of the parking stall and the ramp and have it be located in proximity to the bridge. The alternatives that we looked at would have had a meandering path through the park that would have consumed a lot of the park and several mature trees. So this version really makes a compact footprint, saves the trees, and this project isn't focused on the grass portion of it, but that your point is well taken in that there's no reason that we can't look at converting that grass to drought tolerant going forward.
So what we're looking at here still connects to the existing bridge, but it just appears like it's a pretty massive amount of concrete with a lot of railing, and I'm assuming at least the railing is required. So you need that much built environment in order to satisfy the slope?
That's correct. The vertical difference is enough that it's really hard to get a short path there. And as you shorten the path and the steepness of the ramp increases, it does trigger things like the rails. And I do want to point out that this is the first time anybody's really seen these renderings. We are planning on bringing these two designs forward to public meetings for public input and to have the conversation with the neighborhood about what these will look like or could look like.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that because I'm sure public input will be inspired by eyes on these.
Yes.
These are not final. These are introductory.
Yes.
Okay. Councilmember Moeller?
Thank you, Mayor. I think I'm on the right area. My question may be related back when we were at gas tax and SB1 and pavement index. So I wanted to, as everyone knows, we are now getting franchise fees from Upper Valley Waste Management with the updated contract we have with them through the JPA. And this year we got 2% of our franchise fees. It's being phased in over 3 years. And this coming year we'll get 6%. And then next year we'll get our full 10% allocation. So I am wondering exactly where this fits in, because we really haven't had a discussion. Is this money just going to be dumped into the general fund? It seems like, we could easily form, and maybe we should, this might be a question for our town attorney, a nexus between these funds and their use. Certainly, it can easily be justified to use the franchise fees for improving our street index, because there's many well-documented studies that at least 25% of damage to streets, residential streets, which are not built to the same high index as larger streets, at 25% of their wear and tear is caused by garbage trucks. And we have 3 big heavy-duty garbage trucks that circle Yountville every Mondays. We all know, bright and early. So I just would like to have, and I don't really know where it goes, a discussion about these franchise fees and how we're going to handle them. And how should we handle them?
So I can jump in at this point just to let you know that the franchise fees are being collected into the general fund at this point. And then the general fund is the major contributor to Fund 50. It's contributing 750,000 in this fiscal year to Fund 50. So I'm not sure if it matters that I think it's probably more appropriate that it comes into the general fund and then the general fund transfers out into Fund 50 rather than the franchise fees going straight to Fund 50. But I think that is possibly something that we could change or look into changing if you think that's appropriate and if the town manager think that's appropriate.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it's necessarily appropriate, but there was some discussion about the 750 going in, hoping that was enough. So I just want to, make sure that if we're short, we're really making sure that we're using franchise fees money. I mean, that would be a priority. It doesn't have to be restricted to that, but those funds are coming in, and I think it's always nice to point that maybe that's some of where they went to. So however you do that on a financial basis, that's what I really want to have an understanding about. Or if you think they should be used for something else, and do or should we provide a nexus for receiving those funds and the use of those funds?
The first thing I would say is obviously all of that's a council policy. But the first reaction is you're receiving it as general funds, and then as Director King was pointing out, we are allocating, in this case, some of the funds back into capital projects, and others are going for other programs. But that's certainly something we can have a more extended discussion if that's the council's direct. And then, this is an increasing, it's a stepped up system, so that revenue will be increasing as we move forward.
As long as cleanup day is protected, right?
Well, and cleanup
all
days,
garbage-related things should be paid for.
Right, and just also, as I said, cleanup day is a general fund contribution now. But again, that's why I'm saying franchise fees, much like our Comcast and other, they come in their general fund, and then the council distributes the general fund revenues back out to the programming and staff resources and projects that are appropriate. So I think to your point, you are seeing the benefits of that. We're being targeted a little bit right now with, if you will, with the capital projects fund, because we're also trying to have some capacity to be ready to potentially have a funding source to match potential grants.
Councilmember Tagliabashi.
Thank you very much, Mayor Dunbar. Thank you very much, Director Ferns. I think maybe just a little bit finer detail on Councilmember Muller's point, and maybe this is a good place to put that franchise fee money would be set up a special revenue fund so we could better track the distribution of those funds and maybe dedicate some of those funds towards transportation specifically. I guess that's a council policy setup, but I think I would be supportive of having a special revenue fund where we would know how much money is going in there and how much money is going out and how it's distributed each year. So whether it goes to Capital Fund 50 or some other worthy project or program, I think it is helpful to have transparency on where that money's going, and to help those of us who aren't living in the budget understand it with a simple look at that special revenue fund. So I don't know how that works, but I would be supportive of that. My second comment is asking Director Ferns about the generator switch at Community Hall. So I see that you're estimated 138,000 and change this year. Can you give us an update on that project? And do you have any plans to do a similar upgrade at Town Hall for the annex, which I know you guys ran out of power earlier this week, so I think it's a timely topic and probably a relevant subject.
So for the generator project at Community Hall Community Center, just to remind everybody, we have a stationary generator now that powers Community Hall. We have to bring a portable generator over to power the community center, and neither one turn on automatically. And so the stationary generator that powers Community Hall has capacity to power both buildings. So we have PG&E resiliency grant money in place and working for us to install automatic transfer switches for both buildings and connect community center to that generator. We've hired a company to do that. The company ordered all of the materials to do that back in December of 2021. And when I spoke to them last week, their latest update was a June delivery date of that equipment. So they're trying to get it out of the supply chain. And when they do, they're going to schedule the install. And unfortunately, we had the power outages before that happened, but they were not long power outages. But so it's really the timeline from the supply chain that's holding us up. And then the follow-up answer is, yes, we're seeking grant funds to augment the generator switching system at Town Hall to include the annex, but we haven't identified one specifically yet.
Councilmember Knight, you had your hand raised, but it's now down. Are you okay, or you have a question?
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other questions right now, so we can move ahead.
Okay, repair and replacement funds 81 and 82. The purpose of 81 and 82 is to develop reserves to cover current and future repair and replacement needs that were historically funded by Fund 50. Fund 81 is facilities repair and replacement funds, and Fund 82 is fleet, tools, and equipment repair and replacement. The general fund contribution for this year is $550,000, and the projects that were not listed in Fund 50 are going to show up here. So next slide, please. So specifically, we are at a point where I think, as everybody knows, if you don't maintain things, it costs more to repair and renew them than it does if you maintain them along the way. So we're at the point where it's time to do work at Community Hall, Community Center, and keep it in the condition that we've grown to accustom, which is it looks brand new most of the time. So we've applied these projects in this coming year, and we're working with Parks and Rec Department to try to time it so the bulk of this will happen in a 2-week closure sometime shortly after the beginning of the fiscal year. So first project is resurface the gym floor. That was postponed. It was supposed to come last year or the year prior, but it was postponed due to COVID. Community Hall, Community Center both need painting, so this will be the interior painting of Community Hall, Community Center. The tile and drain replacement is specific to the courtyard. If you haven't noticed, next time you're out there, the tile highlights that are run in a grid pattern throughout the courtyard are broken and failing, and there's some drains that were put in place that don't really serve a purpose. So that project will repair the tiles in some fashion and fix the drain issues. Another project that was deferred during COVID was replacing the roofs on the bus shelters. So these are, as a facility, it's coming out of Fund 81. Same thing with Town Hall. It's I want to say 8 to 10 years. It's had a lot of use, so it needs interior painting. And then the community center restroom countertops really need some help. And so that is the bulk of capital projects coming out of Fund 81. And then Fund 82 is fleet replacement. And we have scheduled in our fleet replacement schedule, we have 2 trucks to be replaced. And so we're proposing to replace those 2 with electric vehicles, trucks going forward. And I think that is it for that's it for funds 81 and 82.
Hey, Councilmember Mueller.
Yes, oh, you took the slide down. Let me see how good my memory is. Okay, it's Fund 81, some of the community center work. It's not all of that, but some of that. It's my understanding that 25%, like the gym and the painting and maybe the tile and drain, I'm not for sure. But that will be reimbursed. Are those considered capital items so that the library will then pay 25% per our agreement?
I'm not prepared to answer that question. I'm sorry. I don't know if Town Manager Rogers knows, but I don't know that one off the top of my head.
I know that, yeah, the agreement we have with the town library, any capital that we do to the community center, they pay their share.
We did approach the library and asked them if they wanted it to be included in the painting portion of this, and they declined.
Councilmember Mueller, to your point, I don't know that the restrooms by themselves at that level trigger. I do know that roofing, solar, things like that certainly do trigger, and the library has a pro rata share requirement.
But not any of the painting, so we can let them,
No, because
they paint their own place?
Yes, that's basically the approach that they are taking. All of the interior painting that we're doing there is reflective of areas that are our responsibility and under our direction for use. We did offer to facilitate it. They chose not to for their portion.
So the tile and paving out front is also not considered capital for our agreement? No?
Not the way the lease is structured. The lease is very specific to the physical space and what supports the space that they're in. So again, roofing, windows, interior, things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Tagliabashi.
Thank you much, Mayor Dunbar. Thank you much, Director Ferns. My question is about the EV. I'm supportive of transitioning to EV. I think it's a perfect setup for our town fleet, given that they generally have a 300-mile range, and we probably drive a lot less than that. My question is, do we have EV infrastructure, or are we installing the EV infrastructure to be able to charge those vehicles? And what is the level of maintenance, or will we get a maintenance contract with those, since nobody in our group, I'm assuming, has any real experience maintaining an electric vehicle?
We do have CP0021 installation of EV charging station as a capital project in Fund 50 to support EV vehicles, fleet vehicles. So we're kind of working in parallel with both, and I hadn't thought about the maintenance of it going forward, so I appreciate your comment, and we will look into that. Thank you.
Thank you. So you anticipate that you're not going to have to upgrade the electrical service at either the Muni Ops building or the Sewer Enterprise Fund. I guess it's not going to be Sewer Enterprise, is that what we would have talked about that earlier. So the Muni Ops building should have sufficient capacity in the electrical service panel to help manage the charging of these vehicles.
Correct. And the PG&E work that's happening in support of the Joint Treatment Plant office building is upgrading the PG&E service to the entire yard. So, yes.
Thank you.
Proactive yet again. Excellent. Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Mayor and Director Ferns. I was in this budget that I was looking at for the CF Fund for Community Facilities 13. It shows resurfacing of the gym flooring. So that is that the proposed for 22-23? Is that the complete cost for that project that we're doing it in this year? I noticed on the CPI, the CIP maps on our website, it shows it was originally in fiscal year 23-24. Were you moving it up a year?
Yes, we're moving it up a year to coincide with the other work, so it can happen during the shutdown of the building. And yes, it is the entire floor it's a full sand and redo of the floor and any reconfiguration of the striping that needs to happen as part of the sports courts.
Okay. I know sometimes when we go out, I'm not sure as part of maybe some of the work for tile work you were talking about earlier, when you go out of the community facility where we have the barn door gate, there's always there's a step down. There is drainage, but there's step downs there that sometimes are awkward for people coming out of the gym area. Is part of your looking at the facility improvements to try to improve that movement through that barn door into the area to the north part of the facility?
No, it's specific to the front courtyard and those aluminum grates that you see in front of both community hall and community center.
Okay. Maybe at some point we could just meet or talk. I mean, I could note for you at least what I'm perceiving in terms of coming out that barn door on the north side of the facility. Sometimes that step is awkward for people, and it sometimes appears to be sometimes a safety issue. So thank you. I also noted that you're putting additional $200,000 in the budget for vehicle replacement. Is that a recognition that in your chart here that shows the cost of vehicle replacement, that those costs have gone up in the last few years?
Yes.
Good. Okay, good. Thank you.
And I want to make sure everybody recognizes we're also talking about transitioning and evaluating and focusing on a transition to electric vehicles. So that's also will trigger a small increase in the cost currently. So I do know some people in the community have been monitoring that, but that adds to the current cost.
And Director Ferns, are we factoring in, when we're talking about our EV capacity at our meeting ops location, support for the new NVTA vehicle that's going to be coming up here, or are there plans to always recharge that off-site? Because it seems to me if it's rotating for hours, I'm a little worried about the capacity. Has that been factored in somewhere?
Yes, that project, NVTA funded the charging stations for those buses in our courtyard, and that work is underway. The conduit's been placed and the pedestals have been placed, and the contractor's coming back to pull the wires and set the actual charging stations in the coming weeks.
And so that'll be independent of the EV stations for our fleet vehicles.
Correct.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Councilor Knight, hand still raised or additional question? Okay. I think we're finished with that section.
Okay, I think Town Manager Rogers is going to talk about the changes from the May 5th budget workshop.
All right. So here where we want to focus is, one, the code compliance, and I'll jump right into that. This is based on the feedback. We're incorporating a funding structure at about 150,000, which is comparable to a management analyst 2-level position. Actually, can we just jump forward to that slide while we're talking about this for a bit?
Actually, and before you get into that, Steve, I was not ready for you to jump right into that conversation yet. I wanted to make sure that before we start evaluating these on a one-off basis and saying yes or no to them, especially with the dollar amount, I think we need to understand how many adjustments, whether they came up at the last workshop or today, that we're actually considering, so that there's some context. So what I have on my list of adjustments, and I'll ask for additions or corrections if I have these notes incorrect. The code compliance position that you just addressed, a in-house IT position that we talked about, consideration for transitioning from grass to artificial turf in our parks and the lawn area at the Outfall Community Center, potential speaker button system for the council dais, expanding our electric vehicle charging station, high-speed charging capacity throughout town. And also today came up franchise fees related to, in particular, waste hauling vehicles and their impacts on our streets. And should we have a special revenue fund associated with that? I'll ask if the council members, by a show of your virtual hand, if you have anything that we discussed that I did not just include in terms of adjustments, and then we'll go through them. Councilmember Moeller?
Can we add to the list the discussion about the special revenue funds for franchise fees?
I said that, I just said that as the last one on the list.
Totally missed that. I apologize, Mayor.
Okay?
Was trying to raise my hand.
Yeah. I don't see any other hands raised. So let's go through that list. And either Steve, Celia, whomever, you have those, hopefully, as I read them, but I'll check them off as we go. I just didn't want to get into, because the compliance and the IT positions are kind of big ticket items that will potentially impact if we feel comfortable with some of the other adjustments. So just wanted that context. So Steve, back to you.
Well, I will say, based on the feedback from the last council meeting, the team went to work on the code compliance position. And we've incorporated that into the current budget that you're seeing at, as I indicated, a management 2 level, distributing the costs throughout the 5 departments as identified. And we started working on trying to identify a range of workflow, looking at this as being additive to support the existing departments, not supplant, not take away. Each department still needs to be the core and the lead, but that we would also bring over from Parks and Recreation the special event amplified sound and filming permit, and that would be put in-house to be coordinated and developed by this position. And that we would work on planning to develop a unique position to us that has a more of a nuanced approach, so that we work on providing a balance. So we're moving forward in trying to do what we believe that the focus is that will come up with that. So that's resulted in us moving a little bit of money around in the building inspection and plan check, because there had been some costs and we're shifting there. We've increased, based on feedback, the Climate Action Committee cost to $20,000. We've increased our sales tax revenue. With regard to the turf projects and speaker button, we are anticipating that those will be brought back to you as programs to be funded from your unassigned fund balance. So those will be one-time programs and expenses. With regard to the IT position, I think, the last conversation was that we would that we would bring you an evaluation and a recommendation for a plan. Currently, you have approximately $95,000 that is allocated towards IT expenditures. And I do know that there is strong support and interest in an IT position. But I also think that if we want to do that, you're going to need to add 50,000. And my suggestion would be that we look at a target, because you need about 50,000 more than the 95, including salary and benefits, in order to bring that in at a management level position, which would be necessary to do the system design, architecture, some of the vendor relationships that are necessary with that. So if that's what you're recommending, my suggestion would be that you add the 50,000. I will have Julie then work on a transition plan, drafting a job description, and we would do a target 6 months with the consultant, give us time to do a transition implementation plan, and then bring the recruit and bring a person on board around the first of the year. And we would still have to do some things like develop a redundancy plan and a situation for backup and stuff. I know people are frustrated with some of our video streaming and our issues, but the IT structure here is really much more significant than just what people see with whether the Zoom went off, the YouTube. I know that's frustrating to people, but we're talking about phone system integration, architecture, software integration, what happens with growth. And, and as I know many of the council knows, we've tried to keep you advised of the various issues. And I wish I could say that we wouldn't have had some of those, but we had a power surge that created one issue. We've had two softwares that didn't talk. And some of them, the most recent issue was we set ourselves all back up for in-house meetings, and the sound system was set up on one system and we communicate. So I get it, but I'm also just going to say it's too simple just to assume that one in-house IT person, because that also assumes that the in-house IT person has that specific set of knowledge. But I hear where you're at, so if that's where you would like to go, that would be a recommendation that I would make. When Celia brings back up the summary, that's going to bring down your annual operating to around 100,000. And again, so we will be within budget. If that's a reasonable course of action that the council supports, we can certainly commit to that. I do not ever want to sound unappreciative to the efforts or entrance to add staffing, but as many of you know, I have really worked very hard to be incremental and look at when is the value to contract. And to me, I think in some cases here, the in-house versus the consultant, it's also about, if we need more, we can also look at more. But if that's the direction the council wants to go, that would be the recommendation that I would have for you at this point in time. That is not going to significantly throw the budget. You will still have a balanced budget, but I do point out an internal staff cost like that is going to be an ongoing cost. It's not a one-time cost, which is why I mentioned the Turk projects, and some of those can be, when we come back with what we've told you, you're going to have some healthy unassigned fund balance. So that's sort of my wrap up to where we're at with regards to the concept of a new dedicated fee. That's a council policy. That's actually one of our next slides for you to talk about. And if you want for us to account for the franchise revenue coming in and then budget coming out, that is not at all a problem. That can certainly be done.
Okay, so I'm going to suggest that we have comments first, specifically about the two in-house positions that have been brought up, and then we'll discuss all the other things after that. But I want us to try to stay focused on one thing at a time so we can have coordinated conversation. So let's hear comments specific to code compliance and IT positions, and two positions, but it's about staffing. So there may be different opinions about whether code compliance is more necessary than in-house IT. And just before I do that, first quick question to Steve, just briefly, is the code compliance for all the water and wastewater and some of those other very technical, state regulatory issues, does all that fall into a general code compliance officer scope of work? Or are some of these things so specialized that a single person with there was a mention earlier about having somebody with experience, but if somebody has experience with, building, sewer systems and water systems, but nothing to do with parking enforcement or design enforcement, I mean, is this really a one-person compliance kind of job?
Can I have the next slide, please? The first thing I'm going to say is it is a misnomer and a misrepresentation to assume that one position is going to do all of the town's code compliance. So I want to make sure that when we're looking at this, this is an additive to assist the existing departments, because our responsibility already exists for the code compliance in this area. So what we're trying to look at here is, and it will be evolving. I want to be really clear, this will be evolving, but we're going to take a look at where this position can help support the existing department staff and augment activities, or in some case, help provide the structure and the technical support. So we've identified, as you can see here, a number of areas that we already have responsibility. So, you know, I'll use an example in Public Works. We have encroachment permits and encroachment and violations. Public Works key staff is still going to have to go out in the field to identify the issues. And then this position could help with the enforcement once the data and the information is brought forward. Very similar to planning situations, very similar to water conservation.
So if I could just jump in, Steve, because I see this is a very long list. The question is, can one person be the code enforcement officer for all these things with the support of our existing staff?
We're taking this as an incremental approach and believe that it will make a significant improvement above the existing. This is adding 40 hours a week of additional
It's
effort.
kind of a yes or no. Is it a single position that we would be considering adding to town staff that would be the enforcement officer for water, wastewater, design, parking, all these things with support from existing staff? Is that the concept?
Yes.
Okay, great. Now, all the council has something to say about these positions, starting with Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Mayor. In terms of code compliance, I think this chart shows that we do need a full-time in-house code compliant officer, because it crosses so many departments. This person is obviously going to assist people in those departments. The people in the departments will have the expertise, and then a code compliant person will have enough experience to be able to go out, meet with the community, meet with businesses, and enforce our code compliance. And I think it will take someone full-time and someone that is spending time in our community full-time to understand and meet people. So I'm supportive of an in-house code compliant officer. In terms of the IT, we started talking about it 2 weeks ago, but I don't think there was a council decision on whether it should be an in-house. I was interested in the concept in terms of the relationship like that we have with our town attorney, where we have a town attorney that has works that represents the town, but is within a large organization of expertise that can handle many issues, and also has staff to help the town when that person is on vacation or unable to work. So I'm not immediately I'm not necessarily for an in-house person. It seems like we should incrementally start. If we can find an organization that has staff that can come in and take care of, and I would assume in the early point, there would be a lot of time spent on the multiple issues with IT, but we may find ourselves eventually better off with a consultant than an in-house and adding another staff person to the town workforce. That's all I have now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Next, I see Councilmember Mueller.
So we're just so I'm clear, we're just focusing on compliance officer and IT, correct?
Yeah, we're talking about potential staffing changes or contractual staffing.
Okay, so I totally support in-house person for compliance. And what I see, just look at what we've got in front of our screen. This is an extremely important, well-needed position. My first question I want to know, I hear management analyst too. You know, I'm sorry, I'm not, haven't memorized your org charts and what that means. Can you give me some idea? Is that like, you said IT is 95, but a full-time person add 50. Is that like a management analyst too? What does that mean?
I think actually, Councilmember Moeller, it's a professional position, tenured, expected background in the 50,000. Management analyst in our organization would include
Somebody with like 5 to 10 years of relevant experience. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, this
Okay.
one's a little rougher, but the the nuance, code compliance is a challenging position. I'm going to be very honest with you right now in terms of recruitment. IT, I'm using this also, and I think.
Well, let me just stick with compliance right now. So if management analyst two really means that it's somebody who's experienced, that's really what I'm looking for, and I really think they need to be in-house. And again, this slide kind of tells it all. So again, I would think this would be a senior enough person, and one of their roles or their major, reason we're bringing them in is to really create and execute and be in charge of, the compliance programs for the town. Now, again, they can go and when they get here and see what's going on with all these different departments. And yes, there may well be adequate help, adequate knowledge that they would then, check the box and say, yeah, we have what we need here. They might also find, well, no, over here, this is really, not up to current standards, and maybe they would be able to help those current staff and bring them up to speed, or, maybe they would also recommend a consultant that might come in for a specialized area. So I think this is very important to bring in full-time to IT. I have a lot of friends and work for, big IT companies. I was just, asking them generally, this is kind of how we do it. What do you think? And they were all actually quite shocked. We didn't have, even with personnel our size, a full-time IT person. I think that for the same reason we're talking about compliance is critical. They are also not necessarily going to be, they might have, deficits, but they'll know exactly what they don't know and be able to maybe, stopgap and fill that on a temporary basis. Going out to one of these big companies that has a jack of all trades and, they'll get this person. If they need something else, they'll bring them in. I wouldn't really advise that at all. Typically you pay, A plus pricing and they bring in the C team. So I think we need them in-house. We, also look at, your, maybe your current person. They've built these systems that we already have in place. There might be, something there that might work out. But I definitely think a full-time person is really critical. Somebody who can, it's not on speed dial, and when there's some problem, somebody you can really go in or have a longer conversation. You just don't get that without having an in-person full-time. And we're growing up. Everything we've talked about today has, IT involved with it. And, we need a, somebody who's knowledgeable, but we give them the responsibility that, this is your job. You have to make sure that you're looking out and wondering if we're doing the right things ahead of time, not a reactive situation. And again, for both of these positions, I really think it's very valuable to put them, perhaps like under Julie. She's already got IT under her name, and now maybe code compliance, a neutral group, so that they can be distributed well at the proper time based on the proper need, working with the individual departments. And, not if you put one person here and one person over there, it just never works out. It's been down that road many times, and those problems will come. So just trying to make sure that we don't run into those and have to fix something later. So that's my vote 2 new employees. We have not added employees lightly over the years, but I think these 2 functions are now critical. I am done, Mayor.
Okay, Vice Mayor Dornbecker.
Thank you, Mayor. Excuse me. Thank you, Mayor Dunbar. So I agree about the code compliance officer. I have met others with other cities, especially among the League of California Cities. There are several that I've met, but I think as long as they're at least able to converse with the staff who actually represent planning, the planning department or the public works department or whatever they're going to need to be, going and checking on the code compliance of those particular issues. And, if somebody has that real well-rounded experience, even better. But I do agree that we do need a full-time code compliance officer. Unfortunately, at this point in our development, we have new landowners that are, what we don't know what changes and things they're going to be wanting to do. So I think all in all, that is a good idea. And about the IT position, I can see both sides of one, having someone who's really comes from a firm with all kinds of intelligence and all kinds of special, knowledge of different aspects of IT, because IT is changing and growing all the time. I can see that person, as Councilmember Knight pointed out with our town attorney. But I could also see that it would be probably a good idea, a better idea, to have someone who is very familiar with us. And I would add that one of the things I would like to see is, one of the first things I would like to see is an IT person who could help us create a synthesized model for our town council meetings. Because as you can see, they try to transition between coming back all live or being all on Zoom or other kinds of web programs to communicate. I think we need a plan to do that. I've talked to a lot of towns and cities that have done that, where they have a synthesized model for council meetings. And I think that it's time, I've discussed this with quite a lot of people, it's time for the town to be able to offer the same thing, because, eventually we will get to the end of COVID, but I'm really glad I don't have to be there today, because I've had the COVID booster and I feel like I've been hit by a truck, so I'm glad I can talk to you from my study at home. But, on a regular evening or a cold evening, or I don't know, I think that it would be worth a consideration to have a synthesized model, to have council meetings, and that IT person could help us set that up and facilitate it for us. So I support both positions, although I know we're going to take a lot of heat from some of the residents about it. But nonetheless, I think you have to be prepared for the future. This is preparing us for the future. Thank you.
Well, let's point out that the Zoom platform and even hybrid platform currently is based on the state's executive order and current state law that allows us to do this. It may not be permitted to have a combination going forward of some members of the council being remote and others not. There are some issues with public accessibility that need to get worked out. We still need to see what the state is going to say about that as we get out of this. That's why I read at the beginning of each of these Zoom meetings that we're holding these remotely in compliance with this particular government code. So yes, if we're trying to, and I've certainly watched a lot of county supervisor meetings where they have additional staff and they still have issues with phone-ins and email and live public interaction. and have an occasional person from the board remote as well, it's still complicated even 2+ years into this. So it's something to consider, but having an IT person in-house doesn't guarantee that we're even going to be able to do that going forward. So with that, Councilmember Tagliabashi.
Thank you, Mayor Dunbar and council. So I appreciate the conversation. I too am supportive of the code compliance person. I'm happy to hear that the town manager and staff have done a little bit of homework and are leaning away from a management analyst and more for a code enforcement person. I think that that's an important difference in what the council was asking for, and I didn't hear that at the initial workshop, and I'm happy to hear that we've evolved to the point where we're all in agreement that a code compliance specialist is imperative to success of this position, and I support that. I'm also very supportive of an IT person. I think the mayor made good points that even the best IT people sometimes have challenges that are beyond their expertise, or the technology just doesn't want to cooperate. I sat in on an NBTA meeting yesterday, and I was in person, and it's the first one that I was able to sit in with, to Vice Mayor Dornbecker's point, that had a hybrid version. So there were people who were attending, Mayor Dunbar attended via Zoom, and honestly, there was a IT person there who helped navigate it. There was a little bit of a hiccup, but it wasn't anything that lasted for more than a couple minutes. And I was eminently impressed with how that worked. And I was thinking of how that would work for us if that was allowed to be an option. I think that like most of the positions that the town council has permitted to increase the town staff, whether it's the public works deputy director, the additional management analyst, the management fellow, each of those positions, we had similar debates and discussions. The council did. There were definitely passionate feelings on both sides of the argument. And I think what I noticed both as a public works director, as a resident, and now as a council member, is that each of those positions operate beyond what anyone and any of the discussions were able to articulate during the discussion. I mean, you just start filling in things that have a need to be done, and they just don't have the bodies to do them, or the expertise. And when that body shows up, then you're able to add more tasks to the operation and become more efficient and effective. And I think our goal is always to have a more responsive and responsible government staff, and I think we do very well at that. And I think I'm always cautious to add additional costs, but I think these two positions in particular will add more value than the cost, and we will see in very short order that they will be a very effective addition to staff, and it will help us in ways that we can't even think about right now. So I'm very supportive of both those, and if needed, I'm happy to have a motion to set the council expectations and staff direction for both of those positions. So I'm not sure if that's needed, but if it is, I'm happy to make a motion, Mayor.
Not needed at this time. We're talking about adjustments to the budget that we'll be ultimately deciding, and we can address those then. I just want to share my thoughts also that I've gone back and forth on both of these because I feel like there are certainly times when we need significant code enforcement support that allows the rest of our staff to do their core work. And I know that it falls within most of the job descriptions, but it's one of those things where you have expertise and then you have somebody having to go, whether it's, planning and building director going throughout town and checking to make sure that, umbrellas don't have advertising on them, or, things that one might consider trivial, or the height of a hedge that we have certain rules about. So I think the expertise of those positions should be used differently. And I also think that we've heard over many years the consistency of enforcement of things. Some people feel like we do a very good job, and some people feel like there's an inconsistent job of enforcement. I think having a dedicated person that is familiar with all of the types of codes and enforcement. My concern was that it's such a hybrid position with certification requirements in some sectors like public works and very different state regulations in planning and building and commercial versus residential, that a single position, a single individual in that position would be very difficult to have somebody that's skilled enough. But with the support of our full-time staff, both at the director level and as part of the different departments, I think that's where the expertise can come in, so that officer knows what he or she is looking for when going out for compliance. So I can support the compliance position. We don't typically craft a job description and a salary structure at the county or the council level. So I leave that in the hands of our team that normally does that, mainly our town manager, and how you allocate not only the salary, but also the scope of work into the different departments. I kind of leave that in your capable hands. The IT, I go back and forth still after hearing council consideration of this. I hesitate a little more to add it as a full-time in-house person, not because of the lack of need for the IT support, but it's, I look at the example of the business model that is very successful for us, which is our town council SEL, town attorney, and having the support and the specialty support of the law firm behind Gary. That's very helpful. Would we benefit from having Gary as a full-time employee? Sure, from his expertise, but I don't know if that's the only, that's not necessarily the best way to hire somebody, especially at a full-time level. So having a full-time person in-house does not bring with it that additional backup and specialty expertise that having a firm or a company. It could be that the School of Technologies, for example, has that support system beyond Jason. We just haven't really ever asked about it. Or somebody else might have that. So I hesitate a little bit more to embrace a full position for the IT in-house, but I also see our continued and growing reliance on technology. So I know the need is there. So I would rather make sure that we have somebody that can support the need that is growing, even if we have a full-time position that we're going to still have to grow into. So I think I'm getting around to saying I can support both of these positions being taken in-house, and the organizational structure and compensation that's appropriate for these types of jobs, because they are new to us. And so we need to have some level of looking at comp positions elsewhere and what we can be competitive at. So I can support adding both at this point. Councilmember Tagliabashi.
Thanks, Mayor Dunder. I appreciate it, and I just wanted to add that I have had talks with Jason when I was the Public Works Director, and he was actually on vacation, and he was talking to me from, in one case, I believe Yosemite, and I said, well, don't you all have backup? And he said, no, I'm a one-man show, which is great. And I was respectful of that when I was the Public Works Director, and realized that there were times when he had other clients, and Liskier does a lot of other work with Jason as an IT person, and but he was mostly responsive when we needed him. But I do believe, and thank you for your support of that an IT person this is the right time for it, based on all the discussions we've had over the last few workshops. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Mayor. I see with the council that there's a support for a full-time person for IT. I guess I feel, as you do, Mayor, that there is definitely a need, but maybe that we need to grow into it. But if the direction of the council is to go out for full IT, I would only suggest, I know the town manager mentioned in his presentation that in the process of going through creating a job description and going through that whole process of hiring someone, that we do have some funds available in this next fiscal year to have a consultant or someone come in, so that that we have that person available to help us in the interim. So, because there is a need, a strong need now. And so Jason may be that person, or the organization he works with to, in the short term, have them more active at town hall, helping us as we prepare to maybe bring someone on full time. Thank you.
Thanks. And Julie, I saw you had your hand up for a moment. I'm going to call on you, even if you put your hand down, that I like to have the council hear your perspective, since you are our point of contact on this. How would, in both of the, well, I'll say specifically to IT, how would a full-time in-house person positively, or if at all negatively, impact the ability for our current staff to do their jobs?
Well, I think that it would be nothing but a positive impact, simply because we continue to grow and bring on new softwares, and the threats of cybersecurity and needing, criteria that public agencies have to meet for our insurance, things like that. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that he is doing that nobody knows. I mean, he's having individual contact with employees constantly, not to mention, true trouble ticket fixing issues. So I think it would take on, I currently manage our entire phone system and ordering all of our stuff, and it would help me tremendously as in my current position as well. It's just becoming a lot. So I definitely think we have grown into it, and we're only going to continue to keep growing. So technology isn't going to go away. It's just going to keep changing and evolving. So I definitely think we are there. I did want to clarify something, that Lescure does have a backup plan. If Jason were to be unavailable for some reason, they contract with another agency to be their backup plan. So there is a backup plan. I just wanted you to know, and that could be something that we would entertain as well as a backup plan for this, rather than having two IT people, which I know hasn't been brought up today. It was brought up at the last meeting, but I think we could definitely find a solution for backup and redundancy, so that person could take a vacation or be sick. So yes, I definitely think we are there. We've been on our way, and we're here. I mean, it's just, we all know it's changing and growing, and then with all the stuff we've had going on with the council meetings, it's not a Jason thing. It's a matter of, we have multiple systems that need to be working together at the same time. And so I think if we had an IT person on site that was here, not that he wouldn't be, but we've never asked him to be available for that. We didn't know the crisis was going to happen until we were in it. But that person could have a better handle on the whole thing. I mean, they would have ownership of all of those components versus myself having ownership of one, or the clerk maybe another. It would just work a little more seamless. I'm happy to answer any more questions.
No, thank you. That's the input and perspective I was hoping to get. So thank you for that. We have examples of in-house, and we have examples of contracted staff. Both have served us very well, and so we are in a position, I think, that we can, very fortunate position for a variety of reasons, that we can even consider adding these positions. And I think, I mentioned when Director Ferns was proposing some of the proactive equipment replacement and system replacement, we don't want to wait until we're in a crisis before we try to find a solution for it. If we can be a little bit proactive and make sure that we have the capabilities, both for code enforcement and technology support, we can avoid having the problems and actually grow our capacity in both of those areas. So I know that eventually we're going to have, I'll check for public comment on the proposed adjustments, but we have some other adjustments that we want to go through. What I believe I'm hearing is at least majority, if not unanimous, support for staff to put together the adjustments that would incorporate a code compliance officer as well as an IT specialist. I mean, those are my terms. If they are special titles or not, whatever the category needs to be. But if you have enough information to create those positions for us to consider in the final budget, then I think that's where we're at. Steve, did you have anything else on just these two particular?
What I want to do is, as I indicated to you, we have a salary allocation in the one you're seeing in the proposed budget today that reflects moving forward with code compliance. We will work on the job description and the structure and move that forward. It will probably take us 60 to 90 days. So there'll be some transition. And again, I want to let everybody know that this is an additive support layer to the existing work that the field personnel, and when I say that, that includes myself, department heads, do in the various code areas. So it's meant to help facilitate and execute those transitions. I'm going to take and add another 55,000 to the budget, and the budget will be roughly half consultant and half of new salary so that we can make a transition plan to go to an in-house IT position. And then the deputy director and I will work on crafting the job description. But again, I'm using, from a benchmark standpoint, the salary and benefits cost of the management analyst 2 level for a benchmark position. And at a 6-month point, if we're a little early, you know, we can then work on that. But that will allow for us to continue with the consultant cost while we're making the transition, engage the consultant in the transition plan, and then also work on finding the redundancy plan. So there may need to be some refinement. And I am going to have Director King show you that that's going to bring us to about 100,000. It'll drop us to about 100,000 unassigned fund balance for the operating costs for the year. And then, as we've already talked about, the turf projects, Director Holland, Director Ferns, and Rosalba Ramirez, our Deputy Public Works Director, we're all anticipating field trips to go up to Calistoga to investigate the turf, and we anticipate bringing those back as a recommendation when we bring unassigned fund balance as an allocation towards that project. Also evaluating what could be done with regards to a speaker button system, depending on cost. There's 2 options there. One, it could be within the $5,000 peg that we already have allocated. If you may recall, we have approximately 5,000 that we put in the budget for an expenditure from your peg. So that could be where that would be addressed and covered. We need to do more homework to know if that's going to be in that range or go beyond. But yes, it's on that one's on our small project list, and I'm kind of thinking it's going to be able to be done in that peg structure. And I think that the other answer, we are going to be going after any EV grant we can from a charging, and that's where we need to look at what's not funded by the grant. So we'll continue to pursue that, and that's why putting a little bit aside. The other thing is, we gave you a teaser a couple of weeks ago. We are going to have at the appropriate time an opportunity to look at some unassigned fund balance mid-year, and there may be some funding structures in terms of the reserve fund levels, emergency reserve fund, revenue stabilization fund, the fund equipment replacement, facility replacement, as well as our PSRP allocations. And we're going to, and some one-time things that you may want to do. So we look forward to bringing that to you. So I think we've addressed that's my notes that I have as well, Mayor, from the conversation. So if there's something I've missed, or let us know, but I do think staff has tried to be responsive to the feedback that the council has provided.
Yeah, before Councilmember Moore up, she put her hand up. I got it. Don't worry. Franchise fees. We'll talk about it. Hold on. So I do not want to overstate the speaker button system is a convenience. It is not a high priority. If it's a significant amount of money, don't spend any time on it. It is just something that allows a little more continuity and working the dais. We've we've survived for decades without it. Certainly, I watching county board meetings where the chair, it is a larger, more spread out dais. It is very difficult sometimes to see the members sitting at the ends of the dais, and just out of respect for wanting to make sure people have an opportunity to speak in the requested order, it is not a critical spend on money. So I'll just put that context to it. The last item I had, franchise fees related to waste hauling vehicle impacts on our streets. This is me just kind of concentrating what Councilor Mueller was bringing up. Fund 50 street repair money was involved in that conversation, and also mentioned by council members Mueller and Tagliabashi about the possibility of a special revenue fund, so that it kind of directs and targets the franchise dollars to specific road street maintenance.
Yeah, as I indicated.
Hold on. Councilor Mueller, just confirm or clarify if I did not present your idea, and then we'll go back to Steve.
Well, quite frankly, I was put my hand up to add one thing to the code compliance, which was SB 1383. The fines were going to go into effect on 2024. There's going to be support for identifying, using my term is the garbage police, identifying the problem. But the code compliance officer will also have to design a program and make sure that fines go out appropriately. So that's why I raised my hand, but I'm more than happy.
Good point on that. Now the other thing.
Okay.
Well, I thought, and I apologize, I thought I was clear that if there was the council interest, we would be happy to indicate the franchise as a revenue fund and then budget out of it. That is a simple thing to do that is not a problem at all. So happy to.
No, we don't have direction from the council yet. It's been brought up by a couple.
That can be done. If that is the council's preference, that is something that certainly we can do. And I think, have the ability to make that as a policy change going forward. Or Celia, do we have enough time, you think, to do it yet this budget?
Well, let's just quickly, I wanted to make sure that we have the right context for this. And then this is going to let us get right into our final section, which is our policies. So let's just clarify, is that the context correctly, Councilmember Mueller?
Yes, and the reason that I believe it's important, since we didn't get into it before, is that our ratepayers are paying the franchise fees. This doesn't come directly from the company. This comes from all the ratepayers. So with a special revenue fund, we will be able to be very transparent to our ratepayers, to not show that we're just throwing it in the general fund and who knows where it goes. We will be able to earmark it. It could be even some used for the code compliance, especially with 1383. It can be used for roads. It may not always need 100% nexus to garbage and garbage trucks, but the transparency, I think, is important.
Good.
And it may become a funding source to help with the code compliance officer.
I just mentioned that.
Right. Councilor Tagliabashi, and then we want to go back to wrapping up the conversation about the general policy review. But go ahead.
Yeah, I think I just support the extra dollars out of the franchise fee for the code enforcement officer. I know when I left, we were actively enforcing mandatory trash, which took a considerable more time than one would think, and I'm sure it's still ongoing. So we have many many tasks that I think we could attach to the trash franchise fee. Whether it's roads or code enforcement, definitely is at the top of that list. So very supportive of having it as a special revenue fund.
And I'm going to ask Vice Mayor and Councilmember Knight just to comment in support or any questions about dedicating the franchise fees into a special fund. Councilmember Knight?
I support that.
Great. I love the brevity, by the way. Thank you. Vice Mayor?
I agree. I support it. I think it's a good idea, and transparency is good, and also making sure that we have the money to do those things is also a very good idea. So I support it too.
Okay, so we have direction on that particular topic. Then we want to go back into our last section of fiscal policy review. I'm not sure if Steve, you seem to be doing the introductions to the sections, but Celia, if this is you, go ahead.
Yes, Mayor, I think it will be me. So
Okay.
is that typo there at the top. This should be 22-23 proposed budget. And again, this does include the code compliance position, changes made to accommodate funding for that. And as Town Manager Rogers said, when we add in the IT position, it will probably bring this down about $50,000. So the net of the revenue versus expenditure and transfers will be closer to $100,000, which is still healthy. I also want to point out that I'm anticipating that this IT position will be allocated over all departments, as they will be touching many departments. So that will also, the final proposed budget will show changes in the water and wastewater operating funds as well. Okay, so here are the transfers. No real change here. It's just to show that the transfers are staying the same, and we have 167,000 anticipated excess after the transfers. And then again, the allocations of the fund balance that we are expecting in fiscal year 22-23. And unassigned fund balance is quite healthy at an estimated 2.6 million. And then the total budget expenditures is looking to be about 20 million, which is growth from the prior budget, which was at 17 million. So about $3 million growth. And that is reflective of, again, our return to pre-pandemic levels, staffing, and projects. And that wraps up the overview, and we will move into fiscal policies review if you are ready. Okay. So this shows the current policies and their minimums and how we are meeting those for proposed fiscal year 22-23. The Committed for Emergencies Fund 04, minimum 20% of general fund expenditures. We're anticipating a fund balance of 2.4 million, so that does meet the minimum and slightly exceeds it. Assigned for budget contingencies at 5% of general fund expenditures, we are able to make that, and it is $516,479 in the general fund. 200,000 for legal contingencies, and then revenue stabilization fund 05. Current minimum is 25% of transient occupancy tax, which we are budgeting 7.5 million in TOT. So 25% of that is, I believe, 1.875 million. So we are exceeding that minimum by quite a bit. We're currently at $2.3 million in expected fund balance at the end of 22-23, so that's about 31%. So I guess here is where we would open it up for discussion of if council would like to increase any of these policy minimums.
And if I could, I gave a little bit of a teaser when we talked about the potential for unassigned fund balance. And I think, as Director King and I have talked, if you change the policy now, or do you want to change it as a goal? But one of the things is when we bring you the unassigned fund balance and you bring and put the money into, for example, revenue stabilization or the committed for emergencies, that may be a more appropriate time to change the target so that we're in compliance with where you want to go. As Director King pointed out, and I think she's frozen. We currently meet or exceed all of the targets. So I'm just saying, I think for those areas, we've given you the teaser, but I think obviously if you are to assign some of the future unassigned fund balance or anticipate that, that will give us the capacity to change the targets going forward at that time. and then we will be in compliance with them going forward.
And I would just, before I go to Councilmember Mola, I want to just throw out a word of caution that we don't overreact to a very unanticipated healthy resurgence from the 2 years out of the pandemic that we may or may not be able to count on in the coming years. So we can certainly overachieve well above our fund balance limits. We're not limited to those. Whether we should raise them or not, I guess, is the question. So, Councilmember Mueller, while I go turn my lights back on.
Okay, I have a question. So during the pandemic, which reserve fund did we draw down from, and how much did we remove?
We anticipating using a little of both of the reserve funds, but we ended up not.
Can you name them,
any of it.
please? Can you name them for us?
Emergency Reserve Fund 04 and Revenue Stabilization Reserve Fund 05.
And can you give us some ballpark numbers about how much came out of those?
We didn't use any. We were anticipating using about 50,000 from each fund, but we didn't end up needing any at the end of the fiscal year.
All right.
So
So
to date,
no funds during the pandemic period were ever removed from any of our reserve funds.
Correct.
Okay, then I don't need to backfill. Thank you.
Yeah, that only took about 15 years of fiscal discipline to manage that. Who knew the pandemic was coming? Any other questions specifically? Thoughts? We need to hear some direction from council on whether we adjust. Now, I would agree with town manager that we don't adjust those
Yeah, I agree.
currently, and that if we want to review that in the future, we can. But I'll just repeat my caution that we can continue to exceed those minimums. Those minimums, I think, are really meant to be there when we are in a more challenging financial situation and we are emphasizing the priorities of what we want to maintain. If we keep creeping them higher and higher, it's going to be more and more challenging to actually comply with our own minimums. Vice Mayor?
I absolutely concur with that. I think that right now, I think, first of all, we'll know better in 6 months exactly whether or not we should raise them, lower them, or continue as status quo. So right now, I think that they're substantial and they're doing well. And I'm really delighted that we didn't have to draw it down any of them. So thank you.
Councilmember Tagliabachi.
Thanks much, Mayor Dunbar, and I think I should thank the council, this council and previous councils for doing such a great job, and the town manager and finance director for putting these funds together and for having the discipline to put the money in good times and bad. And the result is we have healthy funds that, thank God, we didn't have to use in the pandemic. But had we needed them, they would have been there. And as the newest member of the council, I'm going to be the last person to recommend that we change this policy because I think if it's working, you don't mess with it.
Councilmember Mueller?
I just totally concur with what the vice mayor said. I think 6 months, we're going to all be a lot smarter and wiser and can be better prepared for making any decisions about these policies at that time.
I think we have consensus on that. So,
I support that as well, Mayor.
oh yeah, sorry about that, Councilmember Knight. Good, brevity, I love it. Since we're 5 minutes from our allotted time at 4 o'clock, Celia, what more do we need to discuss?
Mayor, that is about it. Just the next steps will be completing any corrections, typos, fact-checking, and formatting improvements to our online budget book. Obviously, a big piece of that will be creating the new special revenue fund and allocating out that IT personnel position. And then we will finalize the document for publication and adoption at the June 21st, 2022 Town Council meeting. And we will present both an online budget book and a budget summary document similar to the one we did last year, which will be a PDF version.
And with that budget summary, whether it's in that document or a related document, we have made some adjustments from the previous workshop and in the 2 workshops, adjustments from what was originally presented. Collectively, we just went through pretty much all of those. Can those be highlighted in particular? So if somebody looked at the original budget and maybe didn't see what we did last workshop and today, that those are readily available in that summary?
Absolutely, Mayor. There is, that is listed in the staff report for the budget adoption. And also there is a special slide about budget preparation that will be in the online budget book. And we can also make it part of the PDF that outlines, you know, how the budget production went and how things flexed and evolved along the way.
Excellent. Thank you. So nothing more from you, Celia?
No, thank you, Mayor. I am done.
Excellent. Steve,
I think
next steps, anything?
you have provided the direction. We just need to go and work on all the inputs and final cross-checking, double-checking everything, and be prepared to bring you the budget based on the direction that you have, consensus direction, I will say, that you have provided through these budget hearings, and look forward to doing that on June 21st.
Thank you. And I'm just going to wrap up, and then I'll invite any other. Oh yeah, Councilmember Knight, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm sorry. I know we had this last section on financial policies. I just wanted to, I read through them as complicated as they are and don't have any questions, but I appreciate all the information that Director King and Town Manager provided us for that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I was going to just make a general comment that we're continuing to be in a very enviable position with our budget. That I've been on this council for 18 years, and every year we've had a balanced budget, and we are able to adopt that budget on time. This is unique, especially these days. We see examples in other places where even communicating what the budgets are much more challenging. We're very transparent and upfront. We invite the public to come along with us through the entire process and make all of our numbers and the information available very easily and clearly on our website, as well as with some other outreach. So I commend not only our finance team, but the town manager's leadership, and how all of our departments come together to really give a clear and very thorough understanding of where the money is going. Where is it coming from and where is it going? And our public has every opportunity to engage in those decisions with us. So it is to be commended. I know several of us are involved with Cal Cities, and we hear very different stories around the state, especially where services are being cut, staff is being cut, and facilities are having to be extended with deferred maintenance to the point where they're almost unusable. We have avoided all of those challenges because of our fiscal management, and it has taken a group effort over many, many years to continue this kind of great work. And so thank you all. It certainly helps that our economic recovery has been swift and strong, but we're also anticipating disruptions and potential other natural disasters that we need to be prepared for that will impact us financially. So on behalf, I'm sure our entire council says thank you to all of you that have helped put the budget together, and not only to put it together, but to continue to have excellent fiscal management of our resources. It's why we have the ability to have unassigned fund balance to then allocate to where we want it to go. I talked to a lot of folks about things we have to do and things we want to do. We actually are able to do both, which is really commendable. So thank you for all of that. A reminder that we do not have a June 7th meeting, so we will be considering adoption of the budget at our next meeting on June 21st. Vice Mayor, comment?
I just want to say thank you to the staff and thank you to especially to Celia, who is so kind and explains so much and does all of you so much. Really do appreciate it. And I just want to say that I really hope that we have an uneventful evening. The wind is picking up. I'm watching it right now in the back garden. And the humidity is so low, so I'm really worried. But I'm hoping that I'll see you, in June, and all will be well. Thank you.
I want to also acknowledge Kyle specifically, as part of our finance team all year, having a much more forward presence with not only reporting to the council, but also, I'm sure, a lot of background work that either Celia or other department heads represent, but it doesn't go unnoticed that we have a great finance team, and then all of the bits and pieces of all of you that add to the finance, the organization as a whole. So thanks to you as well, Kyle. Celia, great leadership and great teamwork. Very proud. Yes, Eddie. Oh, public comment. Eddie, you're not going to let me forget. Is there any public comment that's come in since our initial reading of that?
Thank you, Mayor. No, we want the record to reflect that there's no other electronic public comment received so far.
Well, that's good. Again, thank you. And we certainly welcome feedback between now and our potential adoption in a couple weeks. So if anyone has any questions, want clarification, please reach out to our staff. Look at our website where all the numbers are. So with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn to our next regular meeting, which is going to be June 21st. A reminder, we have canceled our June 7th meeting. So next meeting will be 3 o'clock on Tuesday, June 21st. We will have to be announcing whether that will be in person or remote. It'll be based on the public health conditions at that time. So keep an eye out for that. But I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Motion, Councilmember Mueller, second, Councilmember Knight. Roll call vote one last time, Eddie?
Councilmember Mueller,
Yes.
Councilmember Knight,
Yes.
Councilmember Tagliabashi,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dorn Becker,
Yes, I can't believe I was able to stay all day. Thank you.
Mayor Dunbar.
Yes. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, and make sure you come out to Art Sip and Stroll this Saturday, 11 to 5. Bye.
Thank you.